For decades, the US government sold the world the same pitch. The F-35 Lightning II is invisible to radars, invisible to air defenses, the most advanced, most expensive, most sophisticated combat aircraft humanity has ever built. $1.7 trillion sunk into its development over 20 years. A program so massive it became the largest defense project in American history. And then, over Iranian skies, an Iranian missile, reverse-engineered off 1960s Soviet tech, crossed the gap and detonated meters from the F-35. The Pentagon went quiet for hours. How did the world's most advanced jet get tagged by a missile from a sanctioned nation, isolated, with no access to cutting-edge Western tech? The answer isn't simple. It isn't one mistake, one glitch, one bad call. It's the story of how the F-35's biggest blind spot, a blind spot engineers knew about from day one, got mapped, studied, and exploited with surgical precision by adversaries who'd been waiting years for that moment. Over the next few minutes, we're going to run a full technical autopsy on that event. You'll see exactly how the F-35 works, where it breaks, what the Iranian missile exploited, and what that means for the future of modern air war. To get why the F-35 went down, you first need to get what makes this jet different from anything that came before. The word stealth gets thrown around way too loosely. It doesn't mean the plane is literally invisible, it means it was engineered for the smallest radar signature possible. And the F-35 pulls that off in extraordinarily slick ways. The first piece is geometry. The F-35 doesn't have perpendicular edges, it doesn't have flat surfaces sitting square on to a radar beam. Every angle on the fuselage was calculated to bounce radar waves away from the emitter. When a conventional radar paints the F-35, most of that energy scatters off at other angles, and the radar receiver never gets it back. The second piece is radar-absorbent material, RAM. The F-35 is skinned in composites that literally soak up microwave energy instead of throwing it back. It's the difference between shining a flashlight at a mirror, which throws all the light back, and aiming that same flashlight at a flat, black surface, which swallows it. The real-world payoff is wild. The F-35's radar return has been compared to a golf ball on scope. Against the world's top-tier air defenses, Russian S-400s, Iranian Bavar 373s, the F-35 is essentially invisible at ranges where a normal fighter would be detected, tracked, and engaged. And here's what the Pentagon proudly announced, selling the program to Congress, allies, the whole planet. The F-35 was built specifically to beat radar systems, to beat radar-guided missiles, to operate freely in airspace dominated by systems like the Russian S-400 and their Iranian offshoots. The problem, and it's a big one, is that not every missile hunts with radar. Meet the Pratt and Whitney F-135. It's the heart of the F-35. It's also, no exaggeration, the hottest heat source of any combat aircraft ever built. The F-135 puts out 43,000 pounds of thrust on full afterburner, enough grunt to push a 13-ton jet to supersonic speeds. And like physics always demands, that brutal work throws off brutal heat. The F-135's exhaust plume runs hotter than 900 degrees C. In combat flight, the F-35's tail end is, thermally speaking, a tiny sun crawling across the sky. Lockheed Martin's engineers knew it from the start, and they did what they could. They tucked the turbine blades inside duct geometry that cuts direct infrared emission when you're looking from the front. From certain angles, especially head-on and side-on, the F-35's thermal signature is way smaller than older fighters, but from behind, from below, under certain altitude and atmospheric conditions, the exhaust plumes simply can't be hidden, not with today's tech. Not with any material, coating, or aerodynamic trick on the shelf. Making 43,000 pounds of thrust and hiding the heat that comes with it is physically at odds with itself, like building a bonfire and expecting nobody nearby to feel the warmth. The F-35's stealth was built to fool radars, But there was a whole class of weapons that never used radar to find targets, and the F-35 didn't have a complete answer for them. Here's the concept that changes everything: infrared homing missiles. The gap between a radar-guided missile and an infrared-guided one is fundamental. A radar missile needs to be illuminated, or illuminate, the target itself with microwave energy. The jet under attack picks that up on its radar warning receivers and has time to react. Dump chaff, brake hard, crank up the jammers. It's a warning. An IR homing missile doesn't broadcast a thing. It opens its eye, a sensor tuned to thermal radiation, and just looks for heat in the sky. There's no emission. There's nothing for the jet to intercept. The first clue the pilot gets is often the missile itself already closing, when you might have seconds or less. Fourth-generation IR missiles, the kind Iran acquired and developed off Russian and Chinese tech, use dual-band seekers. They pick up both the engine heat band and the ultraviolet band of the exhaust plume. That makes them dramatically harder to fool with standard flares because they can tell a jet engine's thermal signature apart from the cooler, different spectrum bloom of decoy flares. And there's a second critical issue: attack geometry. When the F-35 is on a strike mission, as it was when it went down, it has to expose its rear exhaust plume at certain points in the maneuver. An IR missile shooter posted low to the rear, on high ground, gets a look at the jet's hottest signature, and front-side stealth simply doesn't matter from that angle. Based on available data, military reporting, and published technical analysis, here's the closest reconstruction of what happened. The F-35E was on a strike against a buried command bunker in Iran's mountains. To put ordnance on target with precision, a GBU-28 penetrator, the jet had to pop up from behind the ridgeline, clearing the terrain mask that had been hiding it from radar. That's always the sketchiest slice of any ground attack run. The second the jet climbs above the ground that was shielding it, it exposes its silhouette, and more importantly, its tailpipe, to systems sitting on the high ground around the valley. The Iranian battery that fired wasn't a conventional radar system the F-35's DAS would be watching for. It was a mobile short to medium-range IR missile system, analogous to the Russian Igla-S or its derivatives, run by an IRGC unit deliberately sited on high ground in the valley below. The missile was launched with less than 3 seconds of engagement window. The pilot ran the standard evasive, dumped flares and pulled max lateral G. One missile chased the flare. The second, with its dual-band seeker, sorted the flare from the real engine plume and detonated by proximity. Fragmentation from the warhead took out hydraulics and flight controls. The pilot ejects. The F-35, the most expensive aircraft in history, tumbles toward Iranian soil. The Pentagon confirmed the loss, then went eerily quiet on the details. But a man-pad shoot-down doesn't tell the whole story. What really rattled American analysts wasn't just the kill, it was how precisely that Iranian unit had set up. To be in the right place, at the right time, with the right attack angle, someone had to know ahead of time, roughly, what altitude, what approach path, and what moment the F-35 would be exposed. That's where the second puzzle piece comes in: Iran's IRST, infrared search and track. An IRST is basically a long-range thermal imaging telescope pointed at the sky. It doesn't emit, it only listens, so it's completely invisible to the F-35's radar warning gear. The jet can be getting tracked thermally from 100 kilometers out with zero indication anyone's watching. Iran picked up IRST tech through multiple channels, including Russian transfers under defense cooperation deals and deep dives on third-generation Chinese systems. The Iranian variant, known as Bashir, was woven into a network of observation posts in the mountains over the ops area. turning rough terrain into a passive sensor web that tracks any aircraft's heat without putting out a single detectable photon. When the F-35 crossed Iranian airspace, it was invisible to radars. But Iranian IRSTs on the heights tracked it like a bright dot on thermal, crunching speed, altitude, trajectory, and piping those coordinates in real time to missile teams staged along the likely mission route. The F-35 was invisible to every system it was built to beat, and wide open to the only system that mattered in that moment. The F-35 carries an extraordinarily slick self-defense suite called DAS, the Distributed Aperture System. 6 IR cameras mounted around the airframe give full spherical coverage. DAS picks up the thermal signature of inbound missiles and warns the pilot automatically. So why didn't it get there in time? DAS was designed mainly to spot missiles that are already inbound, meaning launched and in flight. In this shoot-down scenario, the gap from launch to impact was estimated at under 8 seconds, given short engagement range and low rear aspect geometry. 8 seconds is what an F-35 pilot has to process the warning, pick an evasive, execute it, and punch countermeasures. Down low, the maneuvering margin is way thinner than up high. Any overly aggressive G-pull near the deck is, by itself, potentially fatal. There's also a second technical factor engineers will admit in private. DAS has discrimination limits in high thermal clutter, where hot terrain, sun, and multiple heat sources swamp the sensor picture. Arid mountains under a blazing sun, the Iranian environment, is one of the toughest setups for DAS. It's not that DAS catastrophically failed, it's that it operated inside its design envelope, and in that specific scenario, that envelope wasn't enough. The F-35 shoot-down isn't just a story about one jet, it's a signal that shifts the math of modern air combat in ways US military planners are still chewing on. First implication, IRST and advanced IR missiles are spreading. If Iran, under sanctions with limited access to Western gear, could stitch together a passive tracking architecture smart enough to set up an engagement on an F-35, what can China do? What does Russia already have in the field? Chinese PL-15 and PL-21 class systems carry dual-mode guidance, active radar with IR backup, exactly the redundancy that makes standard countermeasures a bad bet. Second implication, tactics. The kill happened in the most vulnerable phase of a ground attack run, the moment the jet had to unmask from terrain to release weapons. That means the missions the F-35 was purpose-built for, precision strikes into heavily defended targets, are exactly where its infrared exposure is worst. Third implication, politics and money, and this one's going to make waves in Washington. The F-35 program has cost the American taxpayer $1.7 trillion. Lawmakers in Congress were already asking hard questions about unit cost, maintenance headaches, and fleet readiness. A combat loss will feed those fights for years, and pressure to accelerate NGAD, the Air Force's secretive 6th-gen fighter already in development, will ramp up hard. The honest answer is, it depends what you're asking it to do. No aircraft in history has been this capable across this many mission sets at once. The F-35 is simultaneously an air superiority fighter, a strike jet, an electronic warfare platform, an intelligence fusion node, and a first-day asset to roll up air defenses. No previous generation did any one of those jobs this well. Against radar-guided systems, Russian S-400s, Iranian Bavar 373s, Chinese HQ-9s, the F-35 is genuinely hard to engage. At high altitude with data link partners on planned SED missions, it delivers what it promised. American pilots who flew the F-35 in actual combat during strikes on Iran described the stealth penetration as game-changing. The jet slipped through radar coverage windows that would have been suicide for any older type. But the shoot-down exposed a basic rule: no combat platform escapes. There's no invincible system. There's a capability envelope, and there's what happens outside it. The F-35 was built to defeat radar threats, and it was shot down by a threat that doesn't use radar. That's not a program failure. It's a lesson about war. Every tech edge creates incentive for the other side to root around it. Stealth drove investment in IRST. Jammers drove passive seekers. And the next wave of threats is being cooked up right now in labs in Beijing and Moscow for the day the F-35 gives way to NGRD. The F-35 went down. But what that really means isn't that the jet is a flop. It's that no tech advantage lasts forever, and America's adversaries are more capable, more creative, and more patient than a lot of people in Washington want to admit.